how does your character walk into the room? What are they carrying with them? Now, I'm not saying that you have to necessarily change the scene.
I love watching the two of you work together. I was curious, it seemed like you have empathy for this character. And then as the character, maybe you had empathy for the writer as well. What would happen if neither was available? Maybe you didn't write it, or maybe you didn't understand the character and it was a character you didn't necessarily like. How would that translate in body language, in tone, when you're sitting in these different chairs?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, first I'll say I'll approach this question how I would playing a role, because I've had to play all sorts. And very often not very likable characters. And what I've come to realize is that there are many more common threads in people than you think, and ultimately the worse someone behaves, the more hurt they are. So even though they might be, say if I was creating a character that had quite a harsh energy and was quite antagonistic, there could have potentially been some tension there, but ultimately I think the kind of power lies as a writer and an actor to see beyond that and see the layers, or try as much as you can, because I mean, I know we all know people like this, right? Yeah. Who have this very kind of strong physical facade, but actually there's so much going on behind that. Yeah. So maybe I would, in that instance, also allow the character to be seen maybe in more of a public environment, and then on their own or on a bad day, when they're actually quite vulnerable, or speaking to the mom that triggers them, or something that is the cause of their hurt, to kind of understand them a little bit better. So it's not just one context. Because I was saying to Matthew the other day that, you know, we only really show our character as human beings in circumstances. So, you know, it's not like I sit in my chair and think, I'm trustworthy, I'm a bad driver, you know. You have to, you experience those things in environments. So anyway.
It's like it's basically this thing about, and it's like, you know, you show it through action and engagement in the world and events, and you respond to events, and that reveals your character. You don't reveal. It's very difficult to show an actor or a character in isolation. It's hard to make dramatic, and I think it's that thing. But I did want to pick up on what you asked about, because I have had this a lot of times when I've done this assignment where. And I was really happy to see that you liked her and she liked you. And I was like, this is good. It actually feels to me that I've done this exercise where some writers don't trust this character or don't like this character, and then the character doesn't like the writer. And actually for me as a trainer, I'm like, wait a minute, something's wrong here, something's going on here. If you can't feel empathy towards your character, if you can't be interested in your character, even if they are, like you were saying, someone who's pretty evil, it's okay if they're, because sometimes, like, I've had people who play characters like, writer, person's terrible. That's kind of okay from the character not liking the writer. But when the writer doesn't like the character, I'm normally thinking, wait a minute, something's up here, because you're not connecting to the empathy. Like you were saying, like there's always someone that hurt people, even somebody who's damaged. There's something in there. If you can't see that as a writer, it's problematic. So I think if a writer judges their character in this chair, it's normally a little bit of a red flag for me. But you know, if you are judging your character, that's okay. You can work through it, but try and look at them. If you do this exercise again, look at them from the perspective of trying to see what's inside them that is either a reflection of yourself or something that is a hurt person that you can then relate to. And then you'll create, especially with an antagonist, you'll create somebody who's maybe not a sort of a one-dimensional antagonist, because they've got something of you in them. Yeah.
True. Matthew, you talk about the moment before the scene. What is that, and how does this play out?
So again, this is an acting term which I came across, and I thought it can apply quite well to writers when writing a scene, because sometimes when we write a scene, we don't think about, we think of the scene in an isolated way. So it's like, say for example, the scene is John goes into his boss's room and gets fired, and John walks into the room, and there's two characters, John and his boss. And the scene begins with, like, John opens the door, walks in, and the boss says, "You're fired," which would be a bad scene because that's too soon. But you know, maybe you want to start your scene like that. You're fired, and John has to respond in some way. Now you're writing the scene, and when the scene is actually written in the screenplay, it's like interior, office, day, and the scene begins. Now the scene before the scene might be, John sleeping that night. And then there's a gap between John sleeping that night and John walking to the office. But there's a moment before the scene where John has to know what he was doing just before he walked into that room. And the boss even needs to know what he was doing before the scene begins. And it's an acting term called, I don't know if it's called this, but I call it this, the moment before the scene. It's where you get ready. It's a given circle. It's not the given circle. It's like this thing where you as an actor have to inhabit a character. So you can't just walk into the room dead. You've got to walk in carrying the history of what's happened to you before that moment that you've walked into the scene. And very often actors make that up, right? I think it's like you kind of like, sometimes they just do it naturally, I think. I don't know how you do it, but you just kind of flow into the scene. And it's that flow that if you as a writer can know that that is something that's actually happening in the real world of your story, if you can know that the moment before the scene exists as a thing, it can sometimes inform the scene. So how does your character walk into the room? What are they carrying with them? Now, I'm not saying that you have to necessarily change the scene. Sometimes it will though. So maybe he's just been eating lunch and you're thinking, oh, he's just eating lunch. So he walks in with a hot dog or something. He's just finishing a hot dog as he walks in. It's going to be a funny scene. Or maybe, and this is where your imagination, you just make this stuff up, right? Obviously, as an actor, you can't just walk in with a hot dog because it's not in the script. But as a writer, you can use that impulse, that acting impulse of knowing that the character doesn't come out of nowhere into the scene to maybe relook at your scenes. Once you've written them, you can just say, oh, where was he just before the scene? Oh, yeah. Huh. Okay, that could bring an interesting energy into the scene. Maybe the boss is just finishing drinking a coffee and he's a bit wired, or maybe he's like sleepy. I don't know. I don't know how you found this as an actor. If you use this sort of a technique and how it is, what is it like for an actor to just walk into a scene and suddenly just do it?
Well, I think since we work from the page to the performance, we reverse engineer that.
Yes.
So for example, going into the office, it'll be a question of, is this something my character does often and easily? Am I just going to drop an idea that usually is received well, some kind of brainstorming moment? Or am I going to ask for a raise? Because actually I've been mistreated for some time and I feel like I'm entitled, but I'm also really nervous. And that kind of thing then determines, and I think what I do, is I will always keep it in the emotional life will come through the physical body.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Through the breathing, through, like if I'm supposed to be nervous, I'll be pacing up and down. Like, very often you can, as with like the crying exercise, where you do the physical for the emotional to follow.
Yes.
So for example, there's a certain kind of breathing you can do to get the tears to roll, or if you pace up and down long enough, eventually your body starts to think that you're nervous. Or say you're supposed to have run around the block.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that you've run a little bit. And there's a sense of
Exactly.
exhaustion. So yeah.
Yeah. So what's interesting about what you were saying is like it's about how you walk into the room. So I just said in the script, John enters the room, right? But no, an actor will walk in, and there are an infinite amount of ways that they can walk into a room. Like you can open a door. Huh? You can open a door. Huh? That's just two. But you could do so many different ways of walking into a room. And this is the amazing thing about acting, actually, I find, is that there's infinite ways a character could walk into a room. But there's only one right way that character would walk into that room in that moment, in their character arc, right? And if you know that as a writer, you will be able to utilize every moment, every line that you can without overwriting, because you don't want to describe every word. But you could say John like strides into the room, or John cautiously enters the room. So you can use little words to show what is in your brain as the writer, right? Again, it's all about words on the page, but it's using words on the page with an actor's intention. Then an actor will read out and they'll go, strides into the room. Okay, cool. I can stride into the room. It gives me something to work. And then they can still work on why they're striding into the room, but then it gives them something, right?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I was literally going to say the same thing, that I think I tend to be more descriptive when it comes to I don't obviously have a direction on every line, but in terms of how they move or how they respond, and I try to keep the emotional beats quite clear throughout without directing the scene.
Yeah.
More so probably than others, because I'm always coming at it from...
Yeah. Well, you did it in the script that I've read of yours. It was perfect. It was just the right amount of
good.
things. Yeah. And this is this thing about an actor's script. The emotional beats are there. And of course, sometimes you get actors who just write the whole thing out, John opens the door and he's thinking about the way he felt earlier, and like this kind of like overwritten thing, and then he walks,
and things that the audience would never possibly know.
Exactly.
That unless you show it to them, they're not going to
but
understand.
if you still, you can just, and actually, weirdly enough, the walking thing and entering rooms thing is actually, the word walks in a script. You can actually use so many other ways, strides. You can just like go to your thesaurus and look up word. It can tell you about
I do
what
that all the time.
Yeah, that's great. Me too. Right-click thesaurus, and find ways that will describe what the actor's bringing into the scene. So yeah, that's the moment before the scene.